The Trump administration transition setting in motion the need for special elections in Florida. Which seats need to be filled by voters, and when will those elections happen? The Secretary of State joining us to explain. Plus, the campaigns revealed a shift in a key segment of the voting population. Did Kamala Harris or Donald Trump target the true center? Our guest dives deep into the topic of how things have shifted. And downtown's development goals take time. What's the latest on progress? And how does office space in Jacksonville compare to other major cities in the state? Downtown Vision Inc.'s CEO joins us. It's on This Week in Jacksonville.
And so glad to have you with us today. Also here in studio, the Secretary of State for the state of Florida, Cord Byrd. And Cord Byrd is somebody who's from our area. Great to visit with you again. We visited just before election time. I believe it was in the middle or end of October there. So I invited you back because I wanted to talk about these many moving parts since President-elect Donald Trump was elected. He said, hey, I want this person from Florida as part of my administration. And so we've got some special elections coming up. Which special elections are set? And just to help people understand the process, you set these? No, the governor does. How does that work?
Right. Great to be back with you, Kent. So we have two special elections that are currently set, one for Congressional District 1 over in the Panhandle and one for Congressional District 6. So that's Congressman Waltz's seat down on the East Coast.
Yeah, so we kind of picked up on that early on. It was an appointment for Michael Waltz, not a nomination, so he's going to be in.
Right.
And once that was the case, we said, oh, that's going to be open. When it comes to setting special elections, how does this work? Are they? Do you have to work in tandem with that county or the region, the district that somebody's going to be elected in?
Sure. So the governor calls the election. So he calls the special, and then once he issues the executive order, then my team at the Department of State, we then formulate the schedule for the election. And so that is a combination of state and federal law that sets that, and that's one of the places where people were a little confused, but it's because we have our overseas and military voters and don't want to disenfranchise them. Under federal law, we have certain time frames that we have to meet. So both of the special elections will be held on April 1st.
Okay, so same dates for the special election. How does this work with, so that's a Congressional District 1 and 6 that we're talking about. What about state elected positions? So I know that one of the folks who President-elect Trump has said, hey, I support this person, is a state lawmaker. I'm talking about Congressional District 6 and Randy Fine.
Right. So Senator Fine, who is now going to run for Congress, so there will need to be a special election to replace his state Senate seat. Yeah. And then over in the Panhandle, CFO, our Chief Financial Officer, Jimmy Petronis, is going to run for Congress and has received President Trump's endorsement. That will be a governor's appointment to fill that seat until 2026, in which then we'll have another election. Yeah. So every one of these is a little different.
So, and it's interesting because I think back to Jimmy Petronis was a state lawmaker when Jeff Atwater left the CFO's position. He was appointed. And then has been re-elected, I guess. Well, elected and then re-elected to that. So what goes into that state Senate seat? Will that be a same timeline? Hey, you've got just some state rules, not the federal rules that they have to work with?
No, we still have to work with the same federal rules. So we're not going to be able to hold those state special elections at the same time or concurrently with the congressional. So we're waiting on the governor's executive order now and have given him some options for time frames of when those will happen. So don't want to get ahead of myself, but they will not run concurrently with the two specials we have set now.
And it's interesting, there's some different rules that apply also. If I were going to run for a congressional seat and I'm an elected state official, then I have to resign that seat. That's what we saw Jimmy Petronis do, a resignation as CFO effective, I believe, end of March.
Right, and that's what's been a little tricky about this, because in Florida we do have a resign to run law. You can't be a dual office holder, meaning you can't hold two offices at the same time. And so we have to make sure that anyone running for those congressional seats is out of their state office before they would take potentially their congressional office. So they have to, and there's no, it's irrevocable. So there's no, whoops, I made a mistake. Once you send that letter in that you're resigning, that's it. You've given up your seat.
So whether he's elected or not, Jimmy Petronis in this case is not going to be the CFO on April 1st.
Correct. He has resigned, and that has been accepted.
Is there a timeline for the governor to make that appointment? Does it have to be effective April 1st so we don't go a certain amount of time without a CFO, or is that?
No, it really is up to the governor to call the special election, and that has varied throughout time because obviously if there are intervening holidays, we hold the elections on a Tuesday, so we have to get the timing of all of these things right. And certainly we partner with our supervisors of elections because they're the ones who have to run it. We have to make sure that they have the capability to get the election ready. So it's not just we can dictate it. We have to work in cooperation with them.
Just want to help people understand also, the senior senator in Florida is Marco Rubio. He's been nominated by President-elect Trump for a cabinet position. Does he have to resign right away, or no, this is something that he can go through the confirmation process and then find out if he's still a senator or if he's going to be the secretary?
Right. My understanding is that he'll he has until January 20th when the president is sworn in. That's when all of these people will need to be in place. Not that their confirmations will necessarily have taken place, but I mean I think all of their resignations will be effective by then. And then in the case of Senator Rubio, the governor will appoint his replacement until the election in 2026.
Yeah. What are the costs when it comes to these special elections? Obviously, there is some.
Right, depending on the county, and usually for a congressional district, it's going to be several $1 million. The state pays for that, though. When the legislature appropriates money every year for when there are special elections, that the state pays for it, so it's not an impact to the county level taxpayers.
Just briefly, how did you feel like Florida's election in November went? It seemed to be pretty smooth, right?
It went fantastic. I mean, all of the feedback we've gotten, I mean, in watching the nationwide news, I mean, I think Florida was the gold standard when it comes to elections administration. You know, we knew before dinner was over that the results, and just very happy with the team. I mean, I had November 5th circled on my calendar for many years, and was really happy that we once again were the standard bearer for the nation.
And I'll give you some credit. You called it when we talked in October. You said, "Hey, we're going to be the standard bearer for the nation." Secretary of State Cord Byrd, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Kent.
All right, well, stay with us. And just ahead, we're examining the strategies that were in play during Vote 2024 and how the political middle may not be in the same place anymore. That's next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville with Kent Justice.
All right, we're a month removed from election results in 2024, and there's been plenty of celebrating by Republicans and plenty of hand-wringing by Democrats. What hasn't been widely discussed in the analysis, though, has been a shift of the center. I spoke with author and national observer Donald Blair recently. President-elect Donald Trump seemed committed to focusing on his base, and it paid off.
It seemed like that was the strategy. Like he was going to his core, and she was trying to reach out. I think the miscalculation in my mind is that she was reaching out to a center that's moved. So her reach out was to people who are generally satisfied with the way things are going, who think our institutions are serving us well. It was sort of, a sort of cheer, like, let's get behind America. And I don't think that served the times, at least, not this current time. And Trump, while he seemed to be going to his core, either intentionally or inadvertently, was actually appealing more to the center with his sort of change the system message than she was.
So let's talk about some of those things that change. So you called it, you wrote this op-ed recently, and you called it the shifted center. How do you describe that?
Well, it takes a little grade school math. But I don't know if you remember when you learned the difference between the mean and the median. But the mean is an average. You take three numbers, you add them together, and you divide by 3, you get the average. The mean is you put things in rank order, and then you see what is in the middle. And those can be the same or they can be different. So if you have 3 people and one's 5 foot tall, one's 6 foot tall, one's 7 foot tall, the average is 6 feet. And the mean and the median are the same thing. It's 6. If you have someone who's 4 foot tall, 5 foot tall, and 9 feet tall, well, then you have an average of 6. The median is still 5. And the reason I bring that up is because I think that's really what happened in this election, because the people are really more like a median than a mean. So the center that people thought was people are sort of in the middle and average and doing as well as everybody else, and they're generally satisfied with the way things are going. But I don't think that's the case. If you look at how our economy is done, when it goes bad, it disproportionately hurts the working class and the middle class. When it goes well, it disproportionately helps the upper class. And so what you have is like the 5, 6, and 9 foot example, or 4, 5, and 9 foot example. So most of Americans are below the average in terms of how the economy is done and who's benefit from it. So that means the average person's discontented. the average person does want to see something change. And I think that's where the center has moved.
And on that economic note, is that where there was distrust of current administration and thereby Vice President Harris?
I think so, because, one way to look at politics is the left versus the right. The other way to look at it is the, center versus the extremes. And I think, in this case, the center was just looking for change. And in a way, they don't care if it comes from the left or the right. I mean, another way to see that trend and is where it started. It actually started back in the first Trump election, when 12% of Bernie Sanders voters went to Trump. Now, on any political spectrum, left or right, the Sanders voters should have nothing to do with Trump. He was far left. He was, by definition, far right. But to think that 12% went there, 1 out of 8 almost, going to Trump from people who were for him, shows that they were just looking for change. And if it came in a right-wing form or came in a left-wing form, they didn't really care. They just thought the system wasn't helping them, and they wanted a new one. And I think that's happened more and more. And I think that's what you saw in the last election as well.
What do you think we can learn from describing what the new center is, and how is it different than maybe what we had previously conceived of?
Yeah. So if you look back, in the 70s and 80s, and you looked at income growth, generally when the economy grew, all classes roughly grew together. So everybody benefited from a growing economy. That has not been true for the last decade here in the U.S. The gains have disproportionately gone to the top 10%, even more so to the top 1%. So that gets back to the issue of like the average and the median. The person in the middle in the 70s or 80s was someone who was fairly content with the way things were going. They could have felt they were benefiting. The country kept doing well. They were doing well. And if things were seemingly okay in terms of the economy and everything else, then they were all for it. But that was not the case here. So when you looked at measures of the economy, they're actually, fairly positive. The problem is it, again, disproportionately is benefiting a smaller segment of the population. So instead of the middle saying, yeah, they're fairly content with the way things are going, the middle is saying, I don't see those benefits. I don't see this happening to me. And they are discontented. So while that middle may have been, hey, just steady as she goes 30, 40 years ago, the middle now is like, we need something changed.
Your view, do you think we see messaging change for future elections? Do you think that the political consultants will say, we missed there, and now we need to target that center as a reframed center?
I hope that they do. I haven't really seen it too much in the conversation so far. Watching the Democrats is sort of interesting because you had both sides coming in, some saying not bold enough, and some were saying she was too bold. So I don't think there's a clear read by the political class on it. But the reason I think that's true is because I think they're still seeing it in terms of, left versus right, Democrat versus Republican, instead of looking at it as I do, as sort of center versus extremes.
Donald, I'm curious about this. When you look at today's center and say that people were saying, I want change.
Yeah.
Does the incoming administration have more ability to make those changes because there are dissatisfied folks who now support that move?
That's a great question. Because if you go to the actual policies, it's interesting because there's nothing really in the Trump policies that would indicate any addressing of that issue, anything that helps the center get ahead. In fact, there was one poll that was done that took the party names off the policies and just listed the policies of both parties. And most Americans and the center Americans tended to prefer the Democrat policy platform over the Republican one when they didn't associate with a party. But as you know, the electorate's not always digging deep on policy during the elections. They're also often voting on impressions and a little bit of information. And so if you take it one level up from the policy and say, what was the message? The general message of the Harris campaign was, let's keep going. Let's keep on the path that we're on. Whereas the Trump message was, things got to change. And I think people were responding to that meta message as opposed to responding to the actual policies, which is you sort of probe on. Trump really doesn't have any that directly address the issue.
All right, and up next, a look at downtown in the River City. The annual report from DVI and what it means for the future. Next on This Week in Jacksonville.
You're watching This Week in Jacksonville on Channel 4.
And this week, I wanted to bring you an excerpt from our weekly podcast, which focuses on economic growth and development in our region. I spoke with Jake Gordon, the CEO of Downtown Vision, Inc., and we spoke about the number of residents downtown and office vacancies.
I overanalyze everything, Ken. Hold on while I overthink this. It's all relative to what, right? We put in the report openly, again, not an advocacy document meant to inform, meant to help investors, meant to help people that are interested in this stuff. If you look at Miami and Orlando and Tampa, even downtown Miami has about the same leasable square feet as us, and their vacancy is way lower than ours. I mean, but also I think people of Jacksonville would expect that, like downtown Miami has more of a call. It's much more expensive and also more occupied. So it just depends on what your perspective was. You would think that maybe it was cheaper here, which is true, but it would be the same level of occupancy, but it's not. We still have more vacancy. And I think that speaks to Jacksonville as a city being very massive. But you look at the other centers, if you compare vacancy in the suburbs of Jacksonville compared to downtown, relatively comparable. I mean, you look at the other office centers, we are similar to them. So it doesn't speak to downtown related to the suburbs. It really, then you're comparing us to Miami, it just speaks to more that market overall. I mean, right now, if you're an office tenant, you are looking at downtown. You're at least considering it. Now, maybe you'll go to Southside, maybe you'll go to some other places, but downtown is still this, if you want a certain experience in an office tower, Jacksonville gives that to you in downtown. Exactly. So, if you want an ocean of parking in front of your building, well, that's not where and if you need to move and create more of a campus feel, well, that's a different, but you do see, so then if you say that's a high number, it is much higher than it was before. And again, that's really a function of the work from home. I mean, and not just work from home, but also these existing tenants are shrinking their footprint. It used to be 200 square feet for every employee, even when ViStar went to fit out their original space. And then you see recently, offices just don't need as much room. If you go into an office these days, a modern office, it's a little more open and you're a little closer together than you've ever been. So that just adds space. So you see some of the tenants in these bigger buildings are like, hey, I used to be on 6 floors, I really only need 4. Because actually, if I'm on 2 other floors, those people can't connect with people at all. So you just see this modernization of working in today's day and age. And oh, by the way, we're only here 4 days a week, not 5, which is obviously the existential threat to downtowns everywhere, that if everyone worked from home, what would a downtown become? And that's what I mentioned earlier. You do need to make sure it's all about visitors. Because if everyone worked from home, our downtown would still be super important. The symphony's there, the Florida Theater's there, the stadium's there, all the restaurants that would be luxury restaurants, you'd want those to be there. I mean, this idea of shopping can be online and maybe you can still work online, but cultural, tourism events, getting together with other people, live concerts, outside or inside, all of those things need to be in a communal atmosphere, and those are not going away. And for better or for worse, Duval County has put most of those things in one place. They're all in a 3 square mile area in downtown. A lot of our events, almost all of our events in Duval County happen either in downtown or at the beach, another great place that has a lot of communal aspects to it. But a lot of these more suburban areas are just not gonna have that downtown has. And then I just say that's why downtown is still important, even if this work from home trend does continue and we expect it to.
Yeah, and your point about Jacksonville, Duval County being so large in terms of area, that does present a challenge in terms of where people are going to do their business because, hey, maybe it's more convenient for me on my side, on the west side to do business than have everybody go downtown. You said you were overanalyzing it, so let me have you help us out a little bit here. So what are the pluses and minuses of that vacancy for office buildings in downtown? If it's 25 or I think 26% is what I just said, vacancy in office buildings, what's the positive? How can that be leveraged, and what's the negative to it?
Great question, Ken. I think office vacancy is something to be taken super seriously, and I think you see the city of Jacksonville and the Downtown Investment Authority, Lori Boyer running that. They've already done workshops related to, are there other incentives needed for office buildings should they want to convert? The big thing nationwide is office buildings being changed to residential, because right now residential is very, very popular. So you see in other cities, they're taking skyscrapers and the developers changing them. It's really challenging with the floor plate and all that stuff. So I don't know. I know that the city's looking at that, and there's possibility. And I will say in Jacksonville, that's the one thing we have is we do work together. I think people maybe don't think that, but the reality is if you want to invest in downtown Jacksonville, the city of Jacksonville is very excited to talk to you, work with you, and the DIA will definitely work together. And that's not true everywhere. So then you think of the office vacancy. Well, again, we need to really pivot our focus. Residents has been our focus for a while. People that live downtown are just as good as people that work downtown, even better. They don't go home at night and they don't go other places. They stay, so they need even more. Like if you look at retail being supported, everyone would pick people living over people working for retail. And then you just need a lot of those people. So a focus on residential makes sense. And then to me, a focus on tourism and a focus on cultural. Diana Donovan and the Cultural Council has done a great job, but we need a lot more investment in our cultural community, like live music in all these venues. I mentioned the Symphony of Florida Theater is not going away. Live sporting events not going away. Live outdoor events. We need more of those things. And then that goes to what you said earlier with the hotels. So it just means we can't put all our eggs in the worker basket. And to your point, if you look at our report, it usually was that way. We've had about the same amount of office workers, maybe 50 to 60,000 for the last 2 decades, but the residential has climbed exponentially. And now we need to do even more of that. Because with people working from home, with office workers not being around, we're going to have to focus more on visitors than just office workers.
Yeah, I say but right there in that recorded interview. That's because there's a lot more to discuss concerning downtown and the report from DVI. So please check out This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. Our podcast focuses on economic development in the River City and our region. And Jake Gordon, the very energetic Jake Gordon, he's our guest. You can find new episodes every Thursday at 9 a.m. You'll find it right now on News4Jax Plus under the channel This Week in Jacksonville. You'll also find This Week in Jacksonville Business Edition. It's available wherever you find your podcast, like Apple, Spotify, or Google. And This Week in Jacksonville, our Sunday show, airs each Sunday morning at this time. I'm Kent Justice. Thanks so much for watching.
See why every day more people are choosing News4Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.